Thank you again for tuning in to a brand new episode of
Tag and Bag.
Oh, we're back, baby. So, Jeff, thank you again so much for jumping into another episode of Tag and Bag with me, our generational conversational podcast, where every single episode we deal with a different topic and a different point of discussion that we allow ourselves to go off on tangents and segue, and that is our whole spiel. That is our whole thing, our shtick, if you will. This week, I wanted to talk about something that I, to this day, still battle with, still struggle with, which is this notion of achieving a true work-life balance, particularly when you're in education and in the creative arts. It can be a really tricky thing. I would imagine that given some of the work that you've done can require some quite excessive hours in the booth, working away. And I was curious, maybe just as a start point for this, if that has been something that you've been really conscious of, or if there have been certain projects where you've realized, wow, this is really taking me away from, say, my own personal pursuits or family or anything else you wanted to do, just because of the nature of it, the nature of the beast being so all-encompassing. Just wondering if you could speak to that at all, Jeff, if that's something you've had to kind of work through.
Well, should have worked through and yet never quite managed to make that work. It's interesting. I'm reading a book right now about a woman named Zelda Fitchandler, who was the founder and artistic director of one of our oldest regional theaters, the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
And throughout the book, I mean, it's amazing how often it comes up. She sort of mourns the notion that she's given her family their due, because, as is so often the case, and I'm sure you're going to appreciate this, when you get involved in the theater, it's so much fun. It's easy to let that just take over completely everything you do. And I am very embarrassed often to admit that it certainly did with me. I mean, it's kind of a that my kids will talk to me at all any longer, because I was just always away, either
that
traveling,
that
work, or
actually the notion of the geography of it, I think, is the thing that's really, it was always the tricky thing for me, being physically removed often for such lengths of time because of, say, something I was directing in London. I live in Hertfordshire, so I'm north of London here. And the kind of travel time and the kind of returning home times, there's a lot of sort of reheated dinners, a lot of sort of catching up on the weekend because I hadn't simply been present for it. And it's something I am all too conscious of now as a husband, as a father, because I don't do any work on my Saturdays and my Sundays anymore. They are precious time for me. And that is including, if I could be working on something for Burly Bird Media or working on something like this, but I will always make sure that's done when, say, my daughter's gone to bed or we're kind of wrapping down for the evening, because I know how easy it is for me, particularly for me, to get just tunnel vision, single focus, all in on it. And I think, like, I know that you've been working on some audiobook projects recently, right? Like something that's really taken over. How much of that can be sliced and diced up and spread over
that's
sessions?
a little bit different. That's a little bit different. I found the problem was really the most when I was doing theater.
Right. Okay.
Especially as a director, I also ran a theater for 5 years, and I was an associate artistic director on 2 other occasions before that. And the fact of the matter is the work never stops. You just don't run out of things that need attention. So it's very easy to let that take over your life. I mean, you go in early and you stay till way, 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 way late. Years and years ago, I was the National Endowment for the Arts here in the United States used to hire people to go around and visit theaters and then review the work they were doing. But it would start with you talking to the artistic and producerial staff of the theater about what they said they were doing. Then you would see their work and, you'd be able to sort of gauge and make recommendations about funding. I was lucky enough to get to go down to the Mark Taper Forum, where Gordon Davidson, who had been the original artistic director there, was, and we had heard about each other because I did a production of a play that he had commissioned called Tales from Hollywood by Christopher Hampton. So, and somebody had told him that the production we'd done had gone very well. So immediately we were like the best buds. Well, I went in at 9 a.m. in the morning. He'd already been there for a couple of hours. And he gave me like an hour and a half, which none of his staff could believe because all of his meetings were like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Just, he was so delighted to sit and chit chat. We had a great time. So throughout the day, I was talking to other people in the organization. I went to a play reading. I was seeing, what their tech staff was up to, all this stuff. In the evening, I saw a performance. And then at around 11 o'clock at night, there was a reading and there was Gordon. He had been there all day long.
Yeah.
And he fell asleep during the reading, which apparently a lot of artistic directors do. But it's like, not surprised. He was working 16
Yeah.
hours. I mean,
Yeah, that God,
it's
I
crazy.
can.
But you do it. Whereas, see, for me, voice work is a very different thing.
Mm.
I've always considered myself a bit of a freak of nature in a sense, because not unlike an opera singer, it's like I didn't work on this voice that I'm fortunate enough to have. I've just always had this big voice,
Right.
a certain amount of depth. I mean, I sounded like this when I was 14. So, it wasn't as if
I'm trying
I
to
had to do any
reconcile that in my
preparation.
brain. I'm trying to sort of work out the possibilities of that, what that looked like.
And I know, and I could have gotten started so much earlier and,
Sure.
sort of tossed aside some of the other stuff. So, very often, whether it's an audiobook or a commercial, that stuff tends to go quickly. It's stuff
Right.
like theater and then just as much film and TV, because I don't know if you've had experience doing film and TV,
So
but it's
I've done not certainly like in any sort of major line big role, but I did for a couple years there. I was doing extra work.
yeah. Oh, well,
And
then
it's yeah.
you're there all day long.
I did
It's
my longest experience of that was I was on the Kiefer Sutherland show 24. They did a
shut up.
season over here in the UK. It was the final season, the Live Another Day season.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
I love that
it
show.
was my favorite show growing up.
Yeah,
Like
loved it.
it was it. Like Kiefer Sutherland, in
It was
CTU
great.
and all that stuff. It was I'm pretty sure at one point an alert on my computer was the CTU ringtone, the da, 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 like that was definitely there at some point.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
totally. And a dear friend of mine was working on the production side for Leavesden Studios here in England, and he
wow.
said, "Look, we need 200 extras for this big sequence. Jack Bauer was probably chasing a terrorist or something
Oh,
on the underground, and we
that's a
need
pretty
people to
good guess.
be
Yeah.
yeah, as he's wont to do. And we need people to be people going through the ticket barriers and on the platform, and then in the tube train itself." And it was my Facebook profile picture for about 7 years. There's a shot of me where the other extras, we were all kind of standing like this. We were kind of, I was like second tube map reader from the left. I was some minimal part, but they kept removing other extras from the shot because they couldn't get Kiefer, I call him Kiefer, first name basis, Mr. Sunderland, down Sutherland. They didn't get his name right. See, now I really have fucked up. Um, they couldn't get him and the camera through the carriage with all the bodies in the way. So they kept sort of removing us from it. And I
Oh,
just sort of, I kind of just kept my head down. I was trying to avoid eye contact. And eventually it was just me and Jack Bauer in the
wow.
shot. And that's the shot that was it was like 7 seconds of footage. But man, I was down there for 13 hours on that very,
Absolutely.
very warm, closed tube station.
Yep.
So and it's the nature of the beast, isn't it? When I was doing I did a bunch of auditions for stuff that never panned out. But again, it's the journey to London, the sitting in front of the reader. Then I might be meeting someone. Then it's the travel home. It's so much of my time, and it's easier when you're 23 at the time and single and no dependents. When you're 34, married, two step kids, and a kid of my own, it's a different proposition, right? And the idea of me
Absolutely.
jetting off on a merry jaunt is not only less appealing for me now, but also less viable. for me now.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Um,
that's exactly right. And I'll tell you something from my very advanced vantage point of being in my 70s now. Here's the deal. Fact of the matter is, you get to this point and you think, okay, so I gave up, so much of my life to doing this stuff that I loved. It was great, great fun. I met
yeah,
my closest, oldest friends doing it. What do I have to show for it? Clippings? Who cares? Nobody cares.
right,
I think almost anybody is almost immediately forgotten in our profession. You talk to most young people today, and they're not going to know who Laurence Olivier was,
right,
frankly.
okay, yeah,
He was famous. I'm not, but he was. So, you think, oh, that's what I did with my life.
right,
Meanwhile, you've got these children who are growing up, and you think, how many times was I not there at the right time,
hmm,
at the important time to see something extraordinary happening in their lives, or just to be there? Because kids are kind of amazing. They will sort of, take responsibility for, ooh, daddy's tired. Let's not bother him. That kind of a
right, yeah,
thing.
yeah, and the power of proximity there too, isn't
Yeah.
it? The importance of presence, and
Yeah.
you being there, and that's something that took me a minute to really appreciate. I think, particularly because a lot of I was taking on multiple self-employed sort of teaching work and directing work. I was working in youth theaters in East London, and it was all very creatively stimulating. And then I had my own school, lovely jubbly. That's great. I've got complete oversight of everything that's done within it. And I always used to say that if it was shit, it was my fault. If it was great, it was my fault. It was I owned all of it, and that's all great. That's all well and good. But it definitely afforded me the opportunity to sort of to take a step back for a minute, similarly self-reflective as you've done there, and then go, but what actually matters here?
Yeah.
And
That's exactly.
that's where the battle of forging a work-life balance is something I still wrestle with to this day.
Sure.
Do you find, given, I'm looking, we've talked a lot about your setup, you've just moved, you're now in your studio at home. It has that, do you think, created a certain comfort for you in your work, and that you can do this from home? Like, are you predominantly?
Absolutely. No,
Yeah,
there's no question, because it gives me so much more time to do a lot of the things that I find most interesting at this stage of my life. I mean,
yeah,
my career continues kind of. I can't really honestly say I'm semi-retired even, because, I'm doing cameos, I'm going to
mm,
fan conventions, I'm doing all that kind of stuff. I'm still looking for voice work, for instance. And that's all great. But I think the reason that all of that is appealing is that, as I, tell people, I'm not doing theater anymore, mostly because it just takes up too much time. You
right,
don't make any money, and I'm too old. Judy Dench was once asked, what do you need for a long career? And she said, energy. And I just don't have that kind of energy to do 8 shows a week. You know,
yeah.
they're
No,
just
I get,
things
I
I want
do
to
get
do.
that. I do, yeah, I get that completely, because uh, I I was in a position, certainly in my early career. I was just, I was at the time I was a university dropout. I'd moved back home. I didn't have any qualification, and it was a case of, well, it was, shape up or ship out. I've got to sort myself out and take the ownership of that, of the ownership of my choices. So it meant, therefore, in order for me to have, and my parents were incredible. They were so supportive of me, and so present,
Mhm.
especially in my upbringing, that I had to, take on a lot of work to make ends meet, not only from a practical sense, but also from I've got to look further than this in front of me. I've got to be able to look beyond that, and that required a certain sacrifice of time. So when I did then meet the love of my life, and I did then have this family, this almost pre-made family for me initially, and which
Yeah,
has then obviously then grown, and as I've now got my own daughter, and we're married. But it it's amazing to me how profoundly the priorities shifted. Because if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I'd say, what balance? What work life? But what does that mean? My work is my life. So why would
yeah,
I
yeah,
need to balance
absolutely.
it? And it's it's, I suppose, the challenge now is, can I find new ways to be creatively stimulated and also successful career
Hmm.
wise without making the sacrifice of being present and being time. And that truly is, I think, something I'm still working on. And aren't we all, in a sense, right? It's something that we really are all trying to figure out,
Yeah, I think so.
in a sense,
Absolutely.
you know. And that, by the way, that does tie in, I think, a lot of with this shift in your trajectory, and the fact that not only have you said, you know, you've kind of reframed your priorities, you're working from home, you're doing all of this work on your own terms, but is it fair to say that, you know, more than ever before, you're engaging with your communities and your fans and people that follow you in a way
Absolutely.
that, do you think that those two things go hand in hand? There's been a shift in your working focus that's allowed you the flexibility to engage with people.
I think that is true to a certain extent. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the reasons it's happening more was that I didn't realize for the longest time that I had fans. It's like, oh, okay, great, that's nice. And now that I know that there are people out there, who are interested in, meeting me or having something signed or whatever, I love that. I find people incredibly interesting. Not only for all the ways in which we're all alike, but in the many ways that, their stories are very different from
Mm.
mine. And obviously, you're only getting a snapshot of most of the people you interact with at a gaming expo,
Sure, it's so brief, isn't it?
Uh,
That side of it.
it is. But at the same time, it's also been extremely gratifying and illuminating and humbling, and I love it.
Yeah.
I'm much happier doing this than I am, well, that's not entirely fair. I think if we weren't all so damned old, there was a period of time where I got to work with all the people I admired as much as anybody in the
Right.
profession. I was an artistic director. I could actually gather a group of actors that I wanted to be with together, and all of that was swell. And now that doesn't happen. I'm no longer in that kind of control. I'm not directing anymore, and I'm not. And so I thought, well, yeah, I just am not interested in the other stuff. I want to
Mm.
spend time with my friends. I
Yeah,
would rather,
nice.
as I did last year, climb into a car, which I did, and I drove from Seattle, which is, for those of your listeners who don't know, is in the northwest corner of the United States, all the way to the Midwest and all over the Midwest. I think I was probably went through like 10 states
Wow.
on this car trip, seeing friends and family. Some of them people I keep in touch with fairly regularly. Some of them people I haven't seen in 50 years. You know, it's like
And
that's
what a great opportunity you afforded yourself to do that,
yeah,
right? Um,
yeah.
the thing I think that eludes a lot of people is recognizing the value of things like that, of taking that minute to take a trip to go and spend that time with it, because we never have enough time. So
Mm.
it's figuring out a way to make that suddenly matter more to you, that, you know, I'm going to take this as make this a priority for me, right? The other side of it is, and I think this is something that, again, you'll be able to speak to, is that just in your day to day, what do you find yourself now doing when it's, you know, we're not shooting a tag and bag, we're not doing an audiobook, we're not, you know, doing the 86th cameo of the month, you know. So
Right, right.
what is kind of the go-to self-care for you?
Oh, I'm doing a lot of things right now. I'm meditating, which I'd never done before. I'm exploring
Nice.
Buddhism, which I did not know anything about. I always sort of thought it would be interesting to explore, but
Mm.
I hadn't done a thing about it, really. And now I'm reading about it. Now I'm actually meditating. When I was young, I took piano lessons and gave them up, which was stupid of me. And so I've started to try to relearn piano
Oh,
because
amazing.
music
Nice.
is great joy. I've also tried to get off the couch, which I didn't always do. This is a job where you can spend a lot of time sitting.
Mm.
So now I'm trying to get out and walk a lot more because I live in one of the prettiest areas of the country, and it's crazy not to get out and see that. I see a
Yeah,
lot of friends. We get together for coffee dates and lunch dates and all that sort of thing. I'm spending as much time as my son will give me. He's working, so he's got a lot of stuff going on, but it's great to see him. One of the reasons I went back on this trip last year was I drove all the way to Buffalo, New York, where my daughter lives, to see her and her
oh,
husband
fantastic.
and their adorable dog. It's like you know, I'd be content to only do that.
Yeah,
See the people I care about and spend time with them and, find out where they're at, what's going on with them.
for sure. And that's, you never truly recognize the value of that until you're actually doing the thing. Until you're
Yeah.
actually taking that leap, and yeah,
When you were talking about not having enough time, see, I disagree. I think we have all the time we need. It's just that we tend to throw it away because I do this myself. I get up in the morning and I, find myself disappearing into Facebook or into
hmm.
YouTube videos or all that kind of stuff.
You know
And
what?
many of them are
That is,
extremely
yeah,
interesting, but a
that
lot of
is,
it's just junk,
yeah, that is
a lot
fair,
of it's
Jeff.
like,
Actually,
why am I
because
watching this?
yeah, why am I doing this? That no, Jeff, that is fair. And actually, I'd want to add an asterisk to my point there, which is that we never have enough time, often from our own making. It's
Yeah,
our own barriers that we put up, and our own sort of like, we can give us a laundry list of excuses as to why we didn't do that thing or speak to that person or pick up the phone or do that, pick up that old hobby that you wish you hadn't given up, right?
sure.
Unless you just stop making the excuses and just do the thing. And that's
Yeah,
something that's where I think people do struggle, and they do realize they don't have as much time as they think, because it's a bit self-sabotage. They're kind of doing, there's always a reason why you can't do the thing. And
right.
that's something I have, well, I'm trying to address it with this. I always wanted to create a production company that was
Mm.
all kinds of media that excited me, whether it was writing, podcasting, interviews, development, in games, and any of it. And I thought, well, I'm not getting any younger, so give it a shot,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Because it can only not work. I really, it can only, people can only just say no, or it can only just not. But that my whole life won't implode. I certainly don't want to be at a point where I'm saying, oh, I wish I'd, that's not something I want to ever be in a position to do and have any
Sure.
kind of regret. And I think the things you've mentioned, where you sort of talk about specific things for your well-being, mindfulness, and approaching the idea of Buddhism and meditation, being proactive with meeting people, getting out for that walk, enjoying the scenery. I think those are all great things that are very easy wins for people that they don't often take.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, part of this is also I'm at an age, as I often will mention, I'm sure, um, where I'm losing more and more of my friends.
Right.
I actually just lost one of my oldest friends a week ago. He
Oh
had
man.
it was a two perforations in an intestine, and he went into an emergency room, and he developed a blood clot in his lung that went to his heart, and boom, he was gone. I mean, it was none of us were prepared for this. He was
Oh,
younger than
Jeff,
I,
I'm so sorry.
indeed, and it's still quite stunning, but it's also the wake up call that we keep. I've been reading a lot about end of life and that kind of thing as well, and it's because we put it, away. We
Mhm.
don't think about the fact that we have a finite amount of time. It could end at any moment, depending on all sorts of things, that could happen.
For
So it
sure.
seems to me that, now is the time to do the things that are most important for you. And to realize that the things that are most important, at least in my life, are people, you know.
Couldn't
It
agree
used
more.
to be acquisitions. It used to be, I need this book and that book. And I'm
Uh-huh.
still a little bit crazy about, getting that kind of stuff. But it's like, I don't need more books. I need more people.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that once once everyone has that light bulb moment that goes off, it is truly impactful to their life
Yeah.
and how it all
Yeah.
pans out. Because I certainly have I make the joke sometimes with my wife where I'll say things like, you know, oh well, I've had a good run. You know, like if it was just, you know, if the bus hit, you know, I could say confidently I've had a good run, and I'm, you know, it's nice to be content. It's really nice to be content without, but that doesn't have to necessarily sacrifice ambition. You don't have to sacrifice ambition for being content now. You can still plant that flag and shoot to something that excites you. And equally, as much as that is important, it's always remembering, like you said, that the connecting with people, the people that really count, is the thing that will drive you forward. That is the thing that will sustain you and give you, ironically, the longevity that we're all chasing. Is if you
Yeah.
just make sure that you are personally fulfilled, and not just in your career but in your personal life, you are making
Yeah.
sure you don't leave this earth to wherever we end up with any kind of, oh, I wish I'd, or any kind of
Yeah.
regret.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
as is often the case with Tag and Bag, we've segued tremendously. This started as a work-life balance conversation, which is great. Jeff, I can't thank you enough, man, for your honesty and just being so willing to talk this stuff through with me. You can find us on all of the various socials, the Twitters, the Facebooks, and the Insta whatevers, at Burly Bird Media. We are that on all of the things. Just launched our website as well, burlybirdmedia.com. We'll be collating all of the podcasts and live shows that we're doing on Twitch all together in one place, with all of our future projects going to be going through there as well. You can find the legendary S-tier Jeff Steitzer at jeffsteitzervoiceactor.com. He is also on Cameo and is actively engaged in the convention circuit as well. I think don't you have something? Is there a convention
Not
you're
for
able
a
to talk
while.
about?
I just finished it. I just finished
Yeah.
one. No, the one there's still some things in the hopper, and I've got one
Ah.
coming, but not till November. That's a long time. I'm hoping
That's
something will
that's what I think I was
arise.
thinking of. Yeah, that you've got another convention appearance later this year in November, which is amazing. So, Jeff, thank you again for
Of course.
jumping on to another podcast. This has been Tag and Bag with Jeff Steitzer and myself. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Yes, and you should identify yourself, by the way.
Sure. Yeah, I think I don't
You
know.
just said Jeff Steitzer and me.
And
It's
this.
like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.